Welcome to Fraser and Dieter's Culture of Compliance podcast series, where we discuss compliance as a competitive advantage in today's marketplace. I'm Sabrina Serafin, partner and national leader of Fraser and Dieter's process, risk, and governance practice. Today we're talking to Katrina Barrett, a director in our firm who specializes in business transformation, governance, risk, and compliance, particularly when establishing internal controls to encourage financial and regulatory compliance to prevent fraud. Katrina, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Sabrina.
Katrina, you're here today to specifically talk about the importance of internal controls for small businesses. The conventional wisdom is that internal controls are a formality or even a luxury reserved for big business. The sort of fraud that they are meant to prevent would never happen in a small or family business. Why is this an incorrect assumption?
Well, small business owners and leaders tend to feel that they know their employees, perhaps that they're friends or family members, or maybe they've worked for them for quite a number of years. It's easy to fall into the thinking that he or she would never do that to me. It's that misplaced trust, a general lack of internal controls, policies, and procedures that actually creates a ripe environment for fraud to occur in these smaller organizations. The ACFE, the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, actually provides a report to the nations. And in its most recent report, it provides a wealth of insight that clearly specifies how small businesses and private companies are actually substantially more at risk than public companies. And especially those companies that have fewer than 100 employees tend to have more than 40% of frauds committed simply due to the lack of internal controls. When fraud does occur, these small businesses actually experience as much as double the financial loss as other larger organizations in a similar situation.
Well, that's alarming, particularly for those listeners who are owners of small businesses. If we know the risks of not implementing proper controls, let's talk about some of the standard practices that small businesses can establish. What are the most effective safeguards against fraud?
Well, for some quick wins to establish internal controls, one of the easiest opportunities is tone from leadership. Communicating clear expectations to employees in the form of code of conduct or anti-fraud policies, as well as having reporting mechanisms for employees to be able to elevate those concerns if they might see or witness bad behavior taking place, greatly reduces the risk of fraud incidents by as much as 50%. Internal controls focused on detection are actually proven to shorten the duration of any fraud that might be occurring from as much as 24 months down to as little as 10 to 12 months. By shortening that duration, the impact of the fraud itself may actually be reduced by half as well. Steps such as data analysis and monitoring, management reviews, even periodic audit procedures, the existence of an internal audit department just by its sheer presence are all steps that can actually make significant strides in the internal control environment and directly relate to shorter fraud durations and smaller impacts as well.
Can I ask how a small business actually supports an internal audit function?
Well, specifically, our firm, Fraser and Dieter, we outsource or co-source internal audit functions for many small businesses. And so if they're not able to support an entire function year-round, they can reach out to a firm like ours and be able to arrange for an appropriately sized internal audit solution that fits their needs and is the right scale for what they need at that point in their growth.
A term that is often thrown around, but I think may be unclear to a lot of our listeners, is the importance of segregation of duties, particularly as it pertains to small businesses. What's the risk of improperly assigning roles beyond the obvious?
Segregation of duties is a core internal control concept that really relates to requiring more than one person to touch a transaction. So in order to complete a task, a single person should not be allowed to initiate, authorize, and record key transactions from end to end. So SOD, or segregation of duties, is really intended in that way to prevent fraud and error by having additional eyes on a single series of transactions. If you think about key business cycles, such as purchasing being separated from payables, or inventory management being separated from billing and from cash receipts, it's trying to reduce the risk of fraud through either fictitious transactions, falsifying revenue, or misappropriating assets in a small business that really comes to life. A common pitfall for small businesses is that they might have a key employee, maybe it's an office manager or an accounting manager who wears multiple hats and might be crossing multiple business functions in their core responsibilities. When that person is always present, perhaps the jack of all trades or the problem solver, this person tends to, over time, accumulate broader access to certain either systems or just the trust of various employees to provide guidance on key transactions. And that wider authority is really the perfect storm for opportunity. And it's being able to manipulate either the lack of controls or to override existing internal controls and commit fraud that would allow a fraud incident to go undetected for longer periods of time. So going back to that trust factor that I mentioned earlier, it's the formal approval requirements, it's separating some of those specific transactional duties from management reviews that shouldn't really be seen as a lack of trust by a business owner toward its employees, but more as a prudent means of protecting the company's assets, its financial stability, and its reputation for all stakeholders to continue growing in the future.
I think you brought up a great point earlier when you mentioned not just fraud, but errors. The controls that you're talking about or the activities that you're talking about not only protect or reduce the risk of fraud, but more importantly, I would think for most business owners, where that trust is established or they're performing the activities themselves, there's a higher risk of errors when you have one individual who's processing a transaction from end to end. Now, here's the real barrier. When we're talking about businesses of this size, we're often talking about an organization that is running very lean. A business owner may recognize the effectiveness of internal control and still not consider it a worthy investment. So how do you communicate the importance of internal controls to people in this situation that really aren't prioritizing their resources around the internal control environment?
When I have the ability to talk with business owners about internal controls or fraud, I really want to emphasize the strategic aspect of creating an internal control environment that fits their needs today, but is scalable to where they are going in the future. And as a business grows, the internal control solution will grow with them. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have to add headcount or that they would even have to invest in significant system enhancements. It means utilizing the staff that they do have and the technology that's available to them more fully so that they can achieve their business objectives and also prevent the risk of loss or error. So within even a department as small as 5 people, it's absolutely possible and appropriate to segregate responsibilities when you know what you're looking for. And that's where we can bring some of our expertise to the table. Quite honestly, the old adage that trust is not a strategy is never truer than it is in internal controls. While a business owner might want to believe that they've hired the best and the most trustworthy staff, would you know if you were missing a few $100,000? If that loss is gradual or if it doesn't generate a sharp enough anomaly to catch the leader's attention, it could go undetected for years. That is where internal controls can come in and actually detect or prevent these situations before they even occur. The median fraud that's committed at a staff level might last about a year and result in about $100,000 in loss. But if you take that up to the manager level, that fraud might go on for 18 months or longer. The average impact is approximately $200,000. If you step that up to the owner or leadership level, the average loss committed there is anywhere from 2 years or more, and the impact is often over $800,000. So as a business owner or leader in an organization of this size, you really will sleep better at night knowing that you would readily detect and better yet even prevent these financial losses from occurring should an employee step into your organization looking for an easy opportunity to capitalize on their bad intentions.
Well, Katrina, thank you for being with us today and for sharing your insights on internal controls for small businesses. And you've provided our listeners with some interesting ideas to consider. Thank you for listening to Fraser and Dieter's Culture of Compliance podcast. And please join us for our next episode as we continue to discuss ways to transform compliance requirements into investments in your business.
Thanks for listening to one of Fraser and Dieter's branded podcasts. To learn more, connect with us on LinkedIn or visit us at FraserDieter.com and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode.